Get out of my house. Stop living off my money. Those were the words my husband Richard screamed at me on my 75th birthday. He threw my purse out the door like I was nothing. Like I was trash. But he had no idea what was coming. My name is Eleanor. And this is the story of how I took back my life. That morning started like any other. 50 years of marriage. 50 years of the same routine. I woke up to make Richard's coffee, just like I had every single day for half a century. The smell filled our bedroom in the house I bought with my inheritance. The house Richard always claimed as his own. I tiptoed to the kitchen, careful not to wake him. Every piece of china, every cup, every plate, they all held memories. My mother's wedding set with the delicate gold trim. Eleanor, she used to say, a home needs beautiful things. They create warmth and keep your spine straight. I always remembered that. Richard stumbled into the kitchen without looking at me. His eyes looked right through me, like I was furniture. Like I had been for decades. He was a professor. A man of great learning, he liked to remind everyone. He carried himself like his thoughts lived in places ordinary people could never reach. Especially his wife. Coffee's bitter, Eleanor, he said, taking his first sip. Not a complaint. Just a statement of fact, like commenting on the weather. 50 years of these little cuts. My soup was too salty. My cleaning wasn't thorough enough. His books weren't organized properly in his study. I used to cry. Then I learned not to hear. Did anyone call to wish me happy birthday? I asked, setting his breakfast in front of him, cheese pancakes, his favorite. I knew our son Paul wouldn't call. He was completely under his wife Monica's thumb. Richard snorted. He has his own problems. You know Monica. Oh, I knew Monica all right. They arrived for lunch. Paul, my only son, with his guilty, apologetic eyes. And Monica, whose smile never reached her soul. She handed me a bright, screaming gift bag. Inside was a cashmere scarf in poison pink, a color I'd never worn in my life. Monica knew this perfectly well. Happy birthday, Eleanor, she sang. We thought you needed some color. You always look so gray. I felt something twist inside my chest. But I kept my calm smile. Thank you, Monica. How thoughtful. I put the scarf away, knowing I'd never touch it again. It would lie there like a reminder of how they saw me, a colorless shadow that needed brightening. Lunch passed in painful silence, broken only by Richard's monologues. He lectured about politics, about the decline of modern literature, about his incompetent graduate students. Paul, Monica, and I were just props in his one-man show. I watched him and wondered when he stopped seeing me as human. When did I become just a function? A free attachment to his professor title? This house, this very house with its high ceilings and crown molding, I bought it with money my parents left me. Money I didn't spend on clothes or travel, but invested in our future. Our home. A home that allowed Richard to forget about mundane concerns. To write his academic papers and feel like a pillar of society while his modest salary barely covered utilities. He never asked where the money came from. He just accepted it as his due, like everything else. And then, at that birthday table I had set to celebrate my 75th year, everything changed. Richard was heated up, arguing with himself about Peter the Great's legacy. He was telling us about the construction of the Admiralty building. Of course, the main spire was crowned with a ship by the Emperor's personal decree in 1711, as a symbol of Russia's naval power, he declared, looking condescendingly at Monica, who nodded with fake fascination. I don't know why I spoke up. Maybe it was the wine. Maybe it was 50 years of biting my tongue. Sorry, Richard, but the ship on the spire came later, during Reconstruction after Peter's death. In 1711, it was just an ironclad spire. I said it gently, without any desire to hurt him. Just a fact. I'd worked with texts and historical documents my whole life. My memory was sharp and professional. Silence fell over the table like a curtain. Monica looked at me with a malicious smirk, anticipating drama. Paul hunched his shoulders, trying to disappear. And Richard? His face slowly turned purple. His always distant eyes looked at me with cold, naked fury. The fact that I had dared to correct him, the great Professor Whitmore, in front of family, was an unthinkable insult to his authority. He slowly set his fork on his plate. The sound of china rang out like a gunshot. "What did you say?" he hissed. "I was just clarifying a detail, dear." "Clarifying." He jumped up, knocking over his chair. His voice cracked into a scream that echoed through our large, quiet house. "You dare correct me? You, who's lived off my back your entire life? You freeloader." I froze. The words hit me, but they didn't cause pain. They were so monstrously unfair that they seemed absurd. "Stop living off my money," he roared. His face twisted with rage. 50 years I've supported you. 50 years I've spent my professor's pension feeding you, clothing you, and instead of gratitude, you humiliate me in front of family. He paced the room like a caged animal. Monica watched him with poorly hidden delight. Paul sat pale as a ghost, unable to speak a word in my defense. And I sat silent. I looked at this stranger, this terrible man, and couldn't recognize my husband. Inside me was quiet. Empty. No hurt, no tears, no desire to defend myself. Suddenly he stopped. With wild determination, he rushed to the chair where my purse lay. My old but beloved leather bag. He grabbed it, yanked open the front door, and hurled it into the hallway with all his strength. "Pack your things and get out," he screamed in my face, spittle flying. "Out of my house. Right now." I continued sitting at the table. Around me, the world I had built brick by brick for 50 years was crumbling, and I felt nothing. Nothing except cold, ice-cold, all-consuming calm. And in that deafening silence inside my head, I heard a quiet, distinct sound. Click. Like an old, rusted lock that had been stuck for years finally giving way. The illusion I'd lived in for 50 years crumbled to dust. And in that moment, for the first time in decades, I saw everything with perfect clarity. I stood up slowly. Very slowly. My legs, which had served me faithfully for 75 years, didn't tremble. Around me still hung the echo of his screaming, mixed with the smell of cooling dinner and my ruined birthday. Richard was breathing heavily. His chest heaved under his thin house shirt. Monica's face was frozen in a predatory, triumphant smile. She had won. She had gotten what she wanted. Paul stared at his plate as if hoping to burn a hole through it and disappear into the earth. None of them expected me to stand. They were waiting for tears, for begging, for hysteria. They expected me to fall to my knees and beg forgiveness for daring to have my own memory, my own knowledge. I said nothing. I walked around the table. My gaze slid past the overturned chair, past the face of the man I once loved. Now I saw only a pompous, cruel old man with an inflated ego. A stranger. He was just a tenant in my house who had stopped paying rent long ago. I went to the hallway. Each step on the familiar, slightly creaking hardwood echoed in the silence. There on the wall hung a photograph. Richard and me in our wedding year. Young and happy. I remembered hanging it there in that carved frame I bought at a flea market. I thought it would be a symbol of our eternal love. Now I looked at it and saw only two strangers from a distant past. My purse lay against the baseboard, worn and old but so dear to me. I bent down without feeling the usual back pain that reminded me of itself by evening. I picked it up. The cold leather settled familiarly in my palm. My whole life, the part that existed outside these walls, fit inside it. Passport, glasses, small notebook, and phone. I opened the clasp. Paul finally looked up from his plate and made a feeble movement toward me. "Mom," he started. Monica immediately put her hand on his shoulder, stopping him. "Don't interfere, Paul. Father is right. She needs to cool down and think about her behavior." I didn't honor them with a look. I found the number I needed in my address book. I hadn't called it in years, but I knew it by heart. I pressed call. Richard, watching me from the doorway, snorted contemptuously. He thought I was calling my sister or a friend to complain and beg for a place to sleep. His posture expressed the ultimate degree of disgusted superiority. He was waiting for humiliation. My humiliation. The phone rang. Once. Twice. On the third ring, a calm, low male voice answered. "Hello. Leo, it's Eleanor," I said evenly and clearly. The hallway was so quiet that my words sounded thunderously loud. There was a second of silence on the other end, then that same calm voice said, "I've been waiting for your call, Eleanor." "What happened?" "It's time," I answered with one word. Another brief pause. But in this pause, there was no surprise, no questions. There was understanding. Understood. "I'll be there in 10 minutes. Come down." "All right," I said and ended the call. I put the phone back in my purse and waited. I stood in the middle of the hallway in my best dress, which I had worn for the celebration, and simply waited. I wasn't going to pack anything. Everything that was truly dear to me couldn't fit in a suitcase. Everything else was just things. Richard laughed loudly, mockingly. "It's time." "And what is it time for, old woman?" "The nursing home." "Complaining to your friend?" "Begging for a spot on her couch?" "Don't humiliate yourself, Eleanor. Ask for forgiveness, and maybe I'll let you stay in the kitchen, on the little sofa." I was silent. I looked at the antique chiming clock standing by the wall. Grandfather's clock. I had moved it from my parents' apartment after their death. Richard always hated its chiming. Said it interfered with his thinking. But for me, it reminded me of home. Of a real home. The minutes dragged painfully long for them, and completely calmly for me. I heard Richard nervously pacing the living room, Monica hissing something in Paul's ear. They didn't understand what was happening. My calm drove them crazy more than any tears would have. And then, exactly 10 minutes later, as promised, a soft, velvety engine purr came from the courtyard below. A sound completely foreign to our old neighborhood, where only the neighbor's beat-up sedan usually rattled. Monica was first to rush to the window. "Oh my God, who is that?" Richard followed. I couldn't see their faces, but I felt how the atmosphere in the room changed. The sneers and contempt were replaced by bewilderment. I calmly put on my light coat hanging on the rack and walked to the door. Where are you going?" Richard asked in confusion, stepping away from the window. I didn't answer. I turned the key in the lock. The door opened, and I stepped onto the landing. Below at the entrance stood a black, gleaming Mercedes, smooth and predatory as a panther. A man got out, elderly but fit, in an impeccably tailored dark suit. Gray hair neatly combed, movements calm and confident. Leo Ashford, son of my father's best friend. A man who had been not just a financial advisor to me all my life, but a loyal family friend, keeper of its secrets. He saw me on the steps, nodded slightly, and walked around the car to open the back door for me. The gesture was full of such simple, silent respect that I hadn't seen from my own husband in decades. I glanced up at the windows of our apartment. There behind the glass stood two silhouettes, Richard and Monica. I saw their pale faces stretched with amazement. In their eyes was frozen not just questions, mixed with the first, still unrecognized fear. They watched as I, their submissive, gray, dependent Eleanor, got into a luxury car like a queen. I settled into the soft leather seat. Leo carefully closed the door behind me, cutting me off from the past. He got behind the wheel, and the car smoothly, silently pulled away. I never looked back once. My gaze was fixed ahead through the windshield at the lights of the evening city that stretched before me. The city that was mine. Like everything else. The car carried me through the evening streets past glowing shop windows and hurrying pedestrians. I looked at familiar facades but saw them as if for the first time. They were no longer the backdrop for my life, for my trips to the store or pharmacy. They were simply beautiful buildings in a beautiful city. My city. Leo was silent the entire ride, and I was grateful to him for that. Words weren't needed. He brought me to a small but very respectable hotel and handed me a keycard to a room. "Rest, Eleanor," he said simply. "Morning is wiser than evening. I'll call tomorrow." I woke up not to the smell of coffee and not to Richard's shuffling steps. I woke up to silence, absolute, unfamiliar, almost ringing silence of a hotel room. Sunlight flooded the room, reflecting in the mirrored wardrobe door. I lay on the enormous bed with snow-white, crisp sheets and looked at the ceiling. Inside there was no pain, only quiet cold emptiness, at the bottom of which steel resolve was being born. First thing, I called Leo. He answered instantly, as if he'd been waiting by the phone. I asked him to do one thing, the simplest and most important at the moment. He listened to me and answered briefly, "It will be done immediately." And then I simply waited. I knew Richard's rituals better than my own. I knew that at exactly 10 a.m., dressed in his best tweed jacket, he would leave the house and head to his favorite bakery on the corner. Not for bread, for ritual. To buy a fresh croissant, drink a cup of espresso, and feel like part of the European intelligentsia, as he liked to say. I could almost see him entering, nodding to the familiar salesgirl Mary, as she smiled and handed him his usual order. I saw him taking out his bank card from his wallet, our joint card where his pension was deposited. But whose main capital consisted of my funds. The card he used as his absolute property. I imagined him handing it to Mary, and how she, running the card through the terminal, embarrassedly looked up at him. "Professor Whitmore, it's declined." I saw his face. First bewilderment, then a flash of anger. How could it be declined for him, Professor Whitmore? He probably demanded to try again, certain it was an error of that stupid machine. And again, declined. I imagined his face, purple with humiliation, when he had to fumble in his pockets for crumpled bills to pay cash. For him, this was a public slap in the face. I predicted his next step with absolute accuracy. Less than half an hour passed before my phone, lying on the nightstand, vibrated. Unknown number. I didn't answer. A minute later, a voicemail arrived. I played it, holding the phone to my ear. Richard's voice, distorted by rage and interference, thundered from the speaker. "Eleanor, it's me. Stop these childish games immediately. What does all this mean? The bank just called me. You blocked the account. Have you completely lost your mind? Do you understand what you're doing? You're leaving me without means of survival. I demand that you immediately restore everything as it was. If you think you'll achieve something with this pathetic demonstration, you're deeply mistaken. You'll come crawling back to me yet. Remember my words." The message cut off. I calmly deleted it. He still understood nothing. He thought it was a game, that I was trying to blackmail him. He didn't understand that games were over forever. The next call came closer to evening. It was Paul. I looked at his name on the screen and felt how the last warm thread connecting me to my former life stretched and was about to snap. I still forced myself to answer. Mom. His voice sounded tense and guilty. Yes, Paul. I'm listening. Mom, what's happening? Father is beside himself. He says you blocked all the money. I blocked our joint account. That's true. But why, Mom? You've been together so many years. You can't do this. He's an elderly man. You know him. He's hot-tempered, but what, Paul? I asked quietly, and my calm seemed to confuse him even more. He hesitated. I heard Monica's muffled but insistent whispering in the background. She was dictating what to say. Mom, he began again, and his voice took on learned, foreign intonations. Monica and I talked it over. We think you need to come back and apologize to Father. He'll forgive you. It was your birthday, after all. You upset him a bit, well, deservedly so, and he got carried away. It happens to everyone. Apologize. I should apologize for being humiliated and thrown out of my own house. Paul, tell me, are these your thoughts or Monica's thoughts? Another pause and more whispering in the background. These are our common thoughts, he forced out. We're worried about you. Father said, and Monica agrees, that you won't last long on charity from this friend Leo of yours, that this is all just posturing, and in a week when the money runs out, you'll come back with your tail between your legs yourself. Mom, don't let it come to that. Come back now, before it's too late. Come crawling back with her tail between her legs. Those words belonged to Monica. I recognized her style. They were full of such contempt, such confidence in my helplessness. And in that moment, the last thread snapped. Snapped without sound. Thank you for calling, son, I said evenly. Tell your father and your wife that they're mistaken. And don't worry about me. I'm fine. Mom, wait, you don't understand. You have to. I understand everything, Paul. Crystal clear. Goodbye. I pressed the hang-up button, put the phone face down on the table, and looked out the window at the lights of tourist boats floating on the river. Tears wouldn't come. There was only the sensation of a huge burned field inside. My son, my only son, had just delivered an ultimatum from people who had betrayed me. He chose them. Not me. And this pain, dull, aching, turned out to be stronger than yesterday's humiliation. It didn't break me. Instead, it transformed into a cold, hard crystal in my chest. A crystal that gave me strength. Now I knew there was no way back and couldn't be, and that I had to go all the way, not for revenge, but for myself. For those 50 years they had stolen from me, making me believe I was nothing. The next few days passed in a fog of legal consultations. Leo surrounded me with care, but not guardianship. He acted like a strategist, calmly and methodically laying out options before me. We sat in his strict, light-filled office overlooking the cathedral, and for the first time in years, I felt that I was being listened to. Not just hearing words, but understanding their essence. He spread documents before me, property deeds, bank statements that Richard didn't even suspect existed. And I saw before me not just papers, but a map of my life. A life I had built myself. Evenings I spent alone in my hotel room. The silence no longer oppressed. It had become my ally. I thought a lot, remembered. And then one evening, going through memories of the past, I suddenly clearly saw my mother's face, her smile on my wedding day, her eyes full of tears and tenderness, and her hands holding out a small velvet box to me. These are my wedding earrings, Eleanor, she had said then, and my mother's before me. May they protect you as they protected us. They were modest antique earrings of dull gold with small but very pure pearls. I wore them only on the biggest holidays. Their value wasn't in carats, but in generations of love they carried. And in that moment, I desperately, painfully wanted to see them. Just to hold them in my hands, feel their cool weight, touch my history. I knew it was foolish, sentimental, but my hand reached for the phone. I called Paul again. I didn't want to talk to him about money or the quarrel. I wanted to ask him for one small, simple thing. I thought this might become the bridge that could still be built across the chasm that divided us. He answered immediately. His voice was wary. Mom, did something happen? Hello, Paul. No, nothing happened. I have a small request. What? In his tone I heard suspicion, as if he was waiting for another trap. Paul, in my bedroom, in the top drawer of the dresser, there's a burgundy velvet jewelry box. Do you remember it? Well, yes, I think so. There, in a separate pouch, are my mother's wedding earrings, gold with pearls. I really want them with me. Could you stop by, get them, and bring them to me? You can leave them with the concierge at the hotel if you don't want to meet. On the other end of the line, silence hung. Too long, too tense. This wasn't the silence of thought, but the silence of panic. Mom, he finally said, and his voice strangely changed, became higher, less confident. Earrings. Why do you need them now? Cold, thin as a needle, pricked my heart. I just want them with me. What's the problem, Paul? There's no problem. I'm just not sure they're there. What do you mean, not sure? They've always been there. 50 years they've been in the same place. Well, you know, you were always moving things around. Maybe you put them somewhere else. He spoke too fast, stumbling over words. Let me look later when I have time. I'm very busy at work right now, you know. I listened to his babbling, and the icy needle in my heart turned into a frozen lump. He was lying. Lying clumsily, panicking. He was hiding something. Paul, I said, and my voice sounded so cold I didn't recognize it myself. Look me in the eyes, even over the phone, and tell me the truth. Where are the earrings? He fell silent. I heard his labored breathing. And then, almost in a whisper, he squeezed out. I don't know, Mom. I don't have time. I'll call you back. And he hung up. I sat with the phone pressed to my ear, listening to the dial tone. But it wasn't just dial tone. It was a funeral march for my last illusions. The problem wasn't that he didn't want to help me. The problem was that he couldn't. The earrings weren't there anymore. I immediately called Leo. Leo, sorry for the late call. I have a very bad feeling. I told him about the conversation with my son. He listened silently, without interrupting. When I finished, he said only one phrase, but it contained more determination than all of Richard's screaming. I'll check everything, Eleanor. Tomorrow morning you'll have an answer. That night I didn't sleep. I sat in the chair by the window and looked at the dark water. I wasn't thinking about the earrings. I was thinking about what else they might have stolen from me. Leo called at 11 a.m. He didn't beat around the bush. Eleanor, are you sitting down? Speak, Leo. I hired a private detective, a former investigator, very capable guy. He found in a few hours what would have taken police weeks. He went through antique shops and pawn dealers in your neighborhood. Leo fell silent, choosing his words. They sold them. Yes, I asked in a colorless voice. Not just them, Eleanor. Leo's voice was full of restrained fury. They acted quickly, right after you left. Apparently decided you were gone for good and started cleaning out. I closed my eyes. What else? Your Meissen porcelain collection. Remember those shepherd figurines you collected? I remembered each one. One my father gave me when I was 10. Another I bought myself in Dresden when I went to a translators' conference. The bronze candlesticks in Empire style from the living room. The painting. That Dutch still life that hung over the sofa. The painting my great-grandfather brought from Europe. A family heirloom. Leo paused again. Your entire jewelry box, including your mother's earrings. I was silent. The air in the room became thick, heavy. It was hard to breathe. This was no longer just betrayal. This wasn't a fight over money or an apartment. This was deliberate, systematic destruction of my memory. They didn't just throw me out of the house. They were erasing all traces of my existence in it. Cutting my history from those walls, selling it piece by piece for cash. They sold everything to one person, Leo continued. The owner of an antique shop on Oak Street. Unofficially, of course, without documents, but my man managed to talk to him. He confirmed everything. He paid well, cash. Said the seller, a distinguished elderly professor, was in a great hurry. Distinguished professor. They decided I would never return, that a poor, dependent old woman thrown into the street would simply disappear, and they could calmly divide the spoils. Thank you, Leo, I said. My voice didn't waver. Now I know what to do. Please prepare all necessary documents. I hung up, walked to the mirror. A woman with gray hair and very, very old eyes looked back at me. But in those eyes were no tears. Only steel, cold as November waters. No more sentiments, no more doubts. Only war. And I was going to win it. I took a deep breath, exhaled, and called Leo. Leo, we begin. Without delay. Everything's ready, Eleanor. The courier is already waiting. I didn't ask for details. I trusted him completely. I knew he would do everything precisely, measured, and ruthlessly, like a surgeon removing a malignant tumor. Painful, but necessary to save life. My life. I imagined this moment with cold, detached clarity. Morning in my former apartment. Richard probably sitting in his favorite leather armchair in his study, reading the newspaper and waiting for me, broken and humiliated, to call and beg for forgiveness. Monica bustling in the kitchen, already feeling like the rightful mistress. They were confident in their victory. They thought I was just temporarily offended, a capricious old woman who would soon understand her place and return on a short leash. They enjoyed their power, their plans for the future where there was no place for me except in memories of an annoying burden. And then a sharp, demanding doorbell. Not like familiar visitors, official. Probably Monica went to answer, pursing her lips in displeasure. On the threshold, a young man in a strict courier service uniform with a thick sealed envelope in his hands. For Richard Whitmore. Signature required. I saw her taking the envelope, her fingers feeling the thick paper, carrying it to the study like a snake. For you, father. Something official. And then I imagined Richard's hands breaking the seal, his self-assured face slowly changing as he read the first lines. He, a professor accustomed to respectful letters from academies and universities, saw before him the dry, soulless language of jurisprudence. Notice of eviction. These two words he probably reread several times, not believing his eyes. His brain, accustomed to complex intellectual constructions, refused to accept this simple, brutal reality. Eviction. Him. From his apartment. He must have laughed at first, decided it was some absurd mistake or another of my foolish stunts. He began reading further, and the laughter stuck in his throat. In the document, compiled by Leo's best lawyers, was stated in black and white the demand to vacate the residential premises belonging to the sole ownership of citizen Eleanor Whitmore within 30 calendar days. Basis, certificate of property rights such and such number from such and such date. His world, so solid, so unshakable, built on the foundation of his own greatness, cracked for the first time. He suddenly realized that the walls he considered his didn't belong to him, that the carpet under his feet wasn't his, that even this chair he sat in wasn't his. He was a guest. A guest being asked to leave. But this was only the first blow. Another sheet fell from the envelope. Not as thick, thinner, more official. Monica, watching him, probably asked, "Well, what is it? What nonsense?" He didn't answer. He picked up this second sheet. And I saw his face go from purple to deathly pale, how the paper trembled in his hand. It was a copy of a police report. A report about theft of personal property. And then a detailed, merciless list. Gold earrings with pearls, belonging to the complainant's mother, 1 pair. Collection of Meissen porcelain figurines, 18th century, 6 pieces. Bronze candlesticks, Empire style, 2 pieces. Painting, canvas, oil, Dutch school, 17th century, still life, 1 piece. Each word in this list was a nail being driven into the coffin of his reputation. His self-perception. His life. The contempt he felt for me instantly evaporated. In its place came pure animal fear. Panic. He understood. Finally, after so many days, he understood, this wasn't hysteria, not a woman's whim. This wasn't a family quarrel that could be hushed up. This was a full-scale cold legal war. And in it, he wasn't the attacker. He was the accused. Monica probably snatched the paper from his hands. I saw her eyes running over the lines, saw how her beautiful, predatory face distorted, how horror showed through. Not just fear of losing the apartment, this was fear of another kind. Shameful, sticky fear of a petty thief caught red-handed. Theft. This word hung in the air of their living room, poisoning it. Not borrowed, not removed unnecessary junk. Theft. A criminally punishable act. Their world was collapsing immediately, not piece by piece. It was crashing down on them with all its weight in one instant. All their lies, all their self-justifications, all their confidence in my helplessness, all this crumbled to dust. They looked at each other, and in their partner's eyes saw not support, but a reflection of their own fear. They realized they were caught. Not just cut off from money, they were exposed in a crime. Disgusting, low, unworthy of a professor and his refined daughter-in-law. They were no longer victims of a crazy old woman. They were vulgar thieves. And the worst thing for them was that they didn't know. How did I know? How? Who told them? This uncertainty must have driven them mad. They realized I wasn't alone, that behind me stood someone who acted quickly, efficiently, and ruthlessly. Someone who saw right through them. The phone call didn't take long. It rang 15 minutes after the courier marked in his tablet that the package was delivered. I sat in the armchair and looked at the screen. The name Richard glowed on it. I didn't answer. He called again and again and again. 5, 10, 15 missed calls. Then came a message, typed with shaking fingers, full of typos. Eleanor, call back immediately. This is a monstrous mistake. We need to talk. I calmly deleted the message. Then Monica's phone rang. I didn't answer that either. And her message, full of exclamation points and hysterical demands to explain everything, I also deleted without reading. Let them talk, let them scream into the void, let them choke on their fear. The time for talking was over. Now only documents and law would speak. I knew they would come. Panic is a bad advisor. It always pushes toward desperate, thoughtless actions. Not getting answers to their hysterical calls, they couldn't sit idle anymore. They needed to act, to regain the illusion of control. So when the next day the hotel concierge called and said Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore had come to see me, I wasn't surprised. They say it's urgent, Mrs. Whitmore. Should I let them up? He asked politely. Yes, of course, I answered calmly. Show them to the lobby bar. I'll be down in 5 minutes. I didn't want to let them into my room. This was my territory, my fortress, a place where their poison couldn't reach me. And the lobby bar was neutral ground. A public place where shouting was awkward and making scenes was shameful. This deprived them of their main weapon, the ability to pressure me in an enclosed space. I looked at myself in the mirror, put on a strict but elegant pearl gray pantsuit I had bought 2 days ago. Gathered my hair in a neat bun. No jewelry except a thin strand of pearls around my neck. I looked calm, composed, and expensive. Nothing like the woman they had thrown out of the house a week ago. When I entered the lobby, they were already sitting at a table by the window. They looked terrible. Richard had lost weight. His usually arrogant face was gray with bags under his eyes. Monica sat tense as a wire. Her fingers nervously fingered her purse handle. There was no trace left of her show elegance. They both looked exhausted and cornered. I approached the table. They jumped up as if on command. Eleanor. Richard began with a note of false relief in his voice. Finally. We were so worried. What's happening? Why all this? It's some kind of misunderstanding. Monica picked up. Her voice trembled with poorly hidden anger. Mrs. Whitmore, we need to talk. You can't treat family like this. It's cruel to report relatives to the police. Do you even understand what you've done? I didn't answer. I silently sat in the chair across from them and gestured for them to sit. They obeyed. I called over the waiter. Chamomile tea with honey, please, I said in an even voice. Then I looked at them. Would you like to order anything? They stared at me, stunned. My calm, my everyday tone threw them off balance. They were prepared for battle, screaming, tears, and I offered them tea. What tea? Richard exploded. Are you insane? We were sent an eviction notice. We're facing criminal charges. And you're going to drink tea? Exactly, I answered, looking him straight in the eyes. I'm going to drink tea, and you're going to talk. I'm listening attentively. And they began. It was a hurricane. First, please. Richard spoke about 50 years lived together, about how you can't cross out everything because of a small quarrel. He said he loved me, that he got carried away, that he was wrong. Every word was soaked with lies. I felt it. This wasn't a man who repented. This was a man trying to pick the lock to save his skin. Monica played a different role. She cried, spoke about how I had always been like a mother to her, that she just wanted to tidy up, remove old dusty things so I would be more comfortable living. She said they didn't sell anything, just gave it for temporary storage to an antique dealer friend to free up space. She lied so desperately, so talentlessly, that I almost felt sorry for her. I sat and silently listened, occasionally taking a small sip of warm, aromatic tea. I didn't interrupt. I let them speak their piece, pour out everything. I looked at their faces, their gestures, and saw only one thing, fear. When the stream of pleas and lies dried up, and I still remained silent, they moved to the second stage, anger and accusations. How dare you treat us like this? Richard screamed again, forgetting he was in a public place. I devoted my entire life to you, and in gratitude you want to throw me out on the street like a dog. Heartless, ungrateful woman. We cared for you, Monica chimed in. Paul is your only son, and you want to disgrace his father, hang a criminal record on him. You're destroying your own family. I finished my tea and carefully placed the cup on the saucer. The chime of porcelain rang out thunderously loud in the silence that fell. Their words no longer wounded me. They were like stones thrown into a deep well. I heard the splash, but they didn't reach the bottom, my heart. Seeing that this didn't work either, Richard moved to his last resort. Threats. He leaned toward me across the table. His face twisted in a malicious grimace. If you don't withdraw your statements, he whispered, I'll tell everyone you've gone insane, that you have senile dementia. I'll gather a medical board, find doctors who will confirm it. I'll tell all our friends, the entire academic community, that you've become an unbalanced, vindictive old woman, and some con man named Leo is manipulating you to get your apartment. They'll put you in a mental institution, and I'll become your guardian, and then you'll get nothing at all. Think about it, Eleanor. He leaned back in his chair, breathing heavily. He had played his last card. In his eyes stood triumph. He was sure this threat would break me. I looked at him for a long time without looking away. I examined his face, every wrinkle, every vein swollen with blood at his temples, and felt nothing but cold pity. I waited until he finished, until relative quiet reigned in the bar again, disturbed only by soft music and the clink of dishes. And then I spoke. My voice was quiet, but every sound, every word fell into the silence like drops of mercury. Heavy and inevitable. I addressed Richard without even glancing at Monica. Tell me, Richard, you great intellectual who spent his whole life judging the value of ideas, the greatness of works of art. You, who could spend hours discussing Rembrandt's legacy and the market value of Dutch master paintings. I paused, looking directly into his pupils. What was the market price of my mother's memory? I hope your appraisal was accurate. These words weren't a scream. They were spoken almost in a whisper. But they hit them with the force of a physical blow. Richard's face froze. Color drained from it, leaving grayish pallor. His mouth opened but made no sound. He looked at me as if he had seen a ghost. Monica flinched as if struck, and in her eyes, just a second ago full of rage, flashed real, genuine horror. They were crushed not by threats, not by legal terms. They were destroyed by simple, quiet truth spoken aloud. They looked at me and saw not a victim, but a judge. And they understood that the trial had already taken place, and the verdict was rendered. I slowly stood up, left a bill on the table for the tea, and without saying another word, turned and walked to the exit. I felt their gazes on my back. Two gazes full of horror, confusion, and final, crushing defeat. I walked through the hotel lobby, and my back was straighter than it had ever been in my life. I didn't look back. I knew the battle was won not in court, not on paper, but there at that table. But I also knew that a cornered beast is capable of one last, most desperate leap. Richard was exactly such a beast. A beast whose hide was his reputation, and he was ready to do anything to save it. His last move was predictable in its cunning. A few days later, my cousin Sarah from the suburbs called. Her voice was full of anxiety. Eleanor, what's happening with you? Richard called me. He's so upset. He says you completely lost it after your birthday, that you're rambling, that some swindler wormed his way into your confidence, wants to take your apartment. He said you filed some strange reports with the police, that you need to be saved. We're all so worried. He's organizing a family meeting this Sunday at your house. He said everyone must come to convince you to come to your senses together. Will you come? I listened to her and felt no anger. Only cold analytical understanding. Here was his last gambit. An intervention. Gather all the relatives, stage a performance about my insanity before them. Present himself and Monica as victims, concerned children trying to save a lost mother from the cunning predator Leo. He wanted to stage a public trial where he would be both prosecutor and judge. And I would be the incompetent defendant whose words carried no weight. He wanted to use family as a weapon, turn them against me, isolate me, and achieve his goal through social pressure. Yes, Sarah, of course I'll come, I answered calmly. Don't worry, we'll sort everything out. I hung up and called Leo. Leo, they're staging a circus on Sunday. A family council. I thought as much, he answered without a trace of surprise. Classic manipulator's move. Eleanor, you don't have to go there. No, Leo, I'll go. I want you to come with me. Consider me already there, he simply replied. On Sunday, exactly at 3 p.m., Leo and I pulled up to my former home. Leo was, as always, impeccable in his dark suit. In his hands he held a thin leather briefcase. I wore the same pearl gray dress I had worn to the hotel meeting. This was my armor. When we entered the apartment, the living room was full of people. My sister Sarah with her husband, Richard's nephew with his wife, several old family friends. They all sat with tense, sympathetic faces. In the center of the room, in his leather armchair, sat Richard, playing the role of grieving patriarch. Nearby on the sofa, lips pursed, sat Monica with tear-stained eyes. The very embodiment of filial devotion. My son Paul stood by the window, turned away, pretending to study the landscape. Our appearance produced the effect of an exploded bomb. All eyes turned to us, especially to Leo. In Richard's and Monica's eyes flashed panic mixed with hatred. They hadn't expected me to bring the predator with me. Eleanor, who is this? Richard asked hostilely, pointing at Leo. This is Leo Ashford, I introduced him calmly. My friend and representative. He will be present during our conversation. Richard wanted to object, but I didn't give him the chance. I looked around at the gathered relatives. Hello, dear ones. Thank you for coming. I understand Richard has already presented his version of events to you. Now, if you'll permit me, I'd like to bring some clarity. Richard jumped up, interrupting me. What clarity, Eleanor? Come to your senses. Sit down, listen to what your family is telling you. We're all worried about you. He began his speech. It was a masterpiece of hypocrisy. He spoke about my sudden illness, about clouding of reason. With tears in his eyes, he told how I, under the influence of this dark man, he looked expressively at Leo, began to commit strange acts, accuse loved ones of unthinkable things. He begged me to return to the family, to withdraw these horrible, absurd papers I had signed without understanding their meaning. We'll forgive you everything, Eleanor, he finished pathetically, extending his hands to me. Just come to your senses. We only want to save you. Monica sobbed in agreement, wiping dry eyes with a handkerchief. The relatives looked at me with pity and anxiety. Sarah was ready to cry. The performance was played brilliantly. I waited until he finished. Tense silence hung in the room. Everyone waited for my reaction, my tears, excuses, hysteria. I calmly looked at Leo and nodded slightly. He silently stood up, opened his briefcase, and took out several thin folders. He approached each of those present, Sarah and her husband, the nephew, the friends, and handed each one such a folder. Richard and Monica watched his actions, not understanding what was happening. Their faces stretched with foreboding. Please familiarize yourselves with the documents, Leo said in his calm, even voice that was impossible to ignore. The relatives opened the folders with bewilderment. I saw their faces change. First curiosity, then surprise, then shock. The first document in the folder was a notarized copy of the property deed. In black and white it stated the name of the sole owner, Eleanor Whitmore. Basis, purchase agreement from 1978. Sarah raised amazed eyes to me. Eleanor, this is your apartment. I simply nodded. The second document was a copy of my police report about the theft with a complete list of what was stolen. Richard's nephew, reading the list, whistled quietly. But the nail in the coffin was the third document. The last one. It was a simple paper. A receipt written by hand on ordinary paper. I, the undersigned antique dealer, name, received from citizen Richard Whitmore, passport details, numbers, the below-listed items for sale. And then came a list. A list completely matching the list from the police report. At the bottom was a sprawling, self-confident signature, R. Whitmore, and a date 2 days after my birthday. Leo, seeing the question in the relative's eyes, calmly explained. My associate explained to the antique shop owner the difference between being a witness in a theft case and being an accomplice. He preferred to cooperate and provided us with the original of this receipt, which is now in a safe place. Deathly silence reigned in the room. Everyone looked at Richard. Not with pity, not with sympathy. With disgust. He sat in his chair, shrinking as if all the air had been let out of him. His face was the color of old paper. He looked at the receipt in his nephew's hands, and his lips moved soundlessly. Monica covered her face with her hands. Their performance had failed spectacularly. The curtain had fallen, and everyone saw the ugly truth it had hidden. The first to break the silence was Sarah's husband, an elderly, straightforward retired colonel. He stood up, contemptuously threw the folder on the table, and said, looking at Richard. You're not just a scoundrel, Richard. You're a thief. And he, taking Sarah by the arm, headed for the exit. Behind him, silently, one by one, the others began to rise and leave. They passed by Richard without looking at him, as if he were empty space. In one day, in 1 hour, he lost everything, not the apartment, not the money. He lost what he treasured most, his reputation, his face, his right to judge and teach others. He was publicly, mercilessly, and finally destroyed. When only we remained in the room, me, Leo, and those two crushed by their shame, I took one last look at the man I had once loved. Now I saw only a broken, pathetic figure who had destroyed himself with his own greed and cruelty. I walked to the door. At the threshold I turned around. The apartment will be sold, I said quietly. You have 30 days to find new housing. Leo will help you with the details. And I left. Forever. 6 months later, I received a letter. Paul had written it. He told me that Richard had suffered a stroke 3 weeks after that Sunday meeting. He was in the hospital, partially paralyzed. Monica had left him the day after his hospitalization. Paul asked if I would visit his father. He wrote that Richard kept repeating my name. I read the letter twice, folded it carefully, and put it in the drawer. I never answered it. Some bridges, once burned, should stay burned. I live now in a beautiful apartment overlooking the river. Leo helped me choose it. I have new friends, people who value me for who I am, not for what I can provide them. I volunteer at a literacy center, teaching immigrants to read English. I wake up every morning to silence, beautiful, peaceful silence that belongs only to me. And sometimes, when the sun catches the crystal vase on my windowsill just right, I remember my mother's words, Eleanor, a home needs beautiful things. They create warmth and keep your spine straight. My spine has never been straighter. I am 75 years old, and for the first time in my life, I am truly free.